On April 15, 1962, at the Palmer House Hotel in Chicago, Frank Sinatra was performing Chicago when notorious gangster Tommy the Knife Torrino stood up and challenged him in front of 800 witnesses. What happened next became the most legendary confrontation in entertainment history and proved why you never challenge the chairman of the board. If this story moves you, hit that like button and share it with someone who believes in the power of human courage. Frank Sinatra was 3 verses into Chicago when the most dangerous interruption of his career shattered the elegant atmosphere of the Palmer House Hotel's grand ballroom. The April evening had started perfectly. 800 of Chicago's elite packed into the opulent venue, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over white tablecloths and gleaming silverware, the city's most powerful people enjoying an evening with Old Blue Eyes himself. But seated at table 7 directly in Frank's line of sight was a man who had no appreciation for entertainment, elegance, or the unwritten rules that govern civilized society. Tommy the Knife Torrino was Chicago's most feared enforcer, a man whose reputation for violence preceded him into every room he entered. Tommy had come to the Palmer House that night, not for the music, but to send a message to Frank Sinatra about who really controlled Chicago. But the most shocking part was yet to come. As Frank crooned the line, "Chicago, Chicago, that toddlin' town," Tommy Torrino suddenly stood up from his chair, his massive frame casting a shadow across the nearby tables. The conversations at surrounding tables died instantly as every eye in the ballroom turned toward the gangster. "Hey, Sinatra!" Tommy's voice cut through the music like a blade. "You sing about my city like you own it, but you're just another Hollywood pretty boy who wouldn't last 5 minutes on the real streets of Chicago." The orchestra faltered, then stopped playing entirely. Frank's voice died mid-note as 800 people held their breath, suddenly aware they were witnessing something that could turn deadly in seconds. Tommy wasn't finished. "You want to sing about Chicago? Then show me you've got the guts to back it up. Or get off my stage and go back to Hollywood where you belong." Wait, this single moment changes everything you thought you knew about Frank Sinatra. Instead of calling security, instead of backing down, instead of trying to diffuse the situation with humor, Frank did something that stunned everyone in the grand ballroom. He smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a forced grin, but the confident, predatory smile of a man who had been waiting his entire life for exactly this moment. Frank stepped away from the microphone, walked to the edge of the stage, and looked directly into Tommy Torrino's eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried easily through the silent ballroom without amplification. "Tommy the Knife Torrino," Frank said, using the gangster's full street name. "I've been wondering when you'd work up the courage to say something to my face." The audience gasped. Harmed, Frank knew who Tommy was. This wasn't a random heckler, this was a deliberate confrontation between 2 of the most powerful men in America. "You think I don't know Chicago?" Frank continued, his voice growing stronger. "You think I don't know the real streets? Let me tell you something about Chicago, Tommy. I know every alley, every corner, every speakeasy that ever existed in this town. I know because I grew up in Hoboken, which makes Chicago look like a Sunday school picnic." The ballroom was so quiet you could hear champagne bubbles fizzing in abandoned glasses. The audience thought they were about to witness a disaster, but then Frank revealed something that changed everything. "But here's what you don't know, Tommy," Frank said, loosening his bow tie with theatrical flair. "You don't know that I've been waiting 20 years for someone to challenge me like this. You don't know that I didn't come to Chicago just to sing tonight. I came to settle an old score." Frank jumped down from the stage, landing gracefully on the ballroom floor just 15 feet from Tommy Torrino. The audience was frozen between terror and fascination as America's greatest entertainer walked directly toward Chicago's most dangerous criminal. "You want to know if I can handle the real Chicago? Then let me tell you a story about your old boss, Al Capone, and a young singer from New Jersey who once did him a favor that saved his life." Tommy's confident sneer began to fade as Frank continued walking toward him, never breaking eye contact. December 1946. "Tommy, the Green Mill Cocktail Lounge. Your boss was supposed to meet with some out-of-town competitors, but I happened to overhear a conversation backstage that suggested the meeting was a setup. I sent word through my connections, and Capone changed his plans. 3 hours later, those competitors shot up the empty room where Al was supposed to be sitting. Stop. What you're about to hear changes everything you thought you knew about Frank Sinatra's connections. Frank was now standing just 5 feet from Tommy, close enough that everyone could see the gangster's face had gone pale. The feared enforcer was beginning to understand that he had made a terrible miscalculation. "I'll never forgot that favor," Frank continued. "And before he died, he made sure certain people in Chicago knew that Frank Sinatra was not to be touched, not to be disrespected, and certainly not to be challenged by two-bit muscle who think they run a city they barely understand." Frank reached into his tuxedo jacket, and several people in the audience gasped, thinking he was reaching for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a small, yellowed piece of paper. "This is a letter, Tommy, written in Al Capone's own hand, dated January 15th, 1947. It says, and I quote, 'Frank Sinatra is under the protection of the Chicago organization in perpetuity. Any man who disrespects him disrespects me, and any man who disrespects me answers with his life.'" The ballroom was so silent that the ticking of the grandfather clock in the lobby could be heard clearly. But the most incredible part was still coming. Tommy Torrino, the man who had terrorized Chicago's underworld for 15 years, the enforcer who had never backed down from anyone, slowly sat back down in his chair. His hands were shaking as he reached for his water glass. "Mr. Sinatra," Tommy's voice was barely above a whisper, "I didn't know. Nobody told me about Capone's protection." Frank folded the letter and returned it to his jacket. "That's because it was never meant to be used, Tommy. I've been carrying this letter for 15 years, hoping I'd never need it. But when you challenge a man's right to sing about the city that made him, when you question his courage in front of people who came to hear music instead of threats, then you force his hand." Frank turned to address the entire ballroom, his voice now carrying the authority of a man who had just proven he was far more than an entertainer. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. But sometimes a man has to remind certain people that respect isn't just given because you demand it. It's earned through actions, through loyalty, and through understanding that there are bigger things in this world than your own reputation." Stop. The transformation that happens next will leave you speechless. Frank walked back toward the stage, but instead of climbing up, he stopped and turned back to Tommy. "You know what, Tommy?
You were right about one thing.
I am just a singer from Hollywood. But what you didn't understand is that being a singer doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong enough to face a room full of strangers every night and make them believe in something beautiful." Frank extended his hand toward the gangster. "So here's what we're going to do. You're going to come up on this stage with me, and we're going to finish this song together. Because Chicago is big enough for both of us, and this audience deserves to see what happens when two men settle their differences like civilized human beings." The ballroom held its breath as Tommy Torrino stared at Frank's outstretched hand. For a moment that seemed to last forever, nobody knew which way the confrontation would go. Then Tommy stood up slowly, walked over to Frank, and shook his hand. The applause that erupted from the audience was unlike anything the Palmer House had ever heard. It wasn't just applause for entertainment, it was applause for courage, for dignity, for the rare sight of two powerful men choosing respect over violence. What happened next transformed the evening into legend. Frank and Tommy walked onto the stage together, Frank handing Tommy the backup microphone. "You know the words to Chicago?" Frank asked. "Every word," Tommy replied, his voice now steady and respectful. What followed was the most unlikely duet in entertainment history. Frank Sinatra and Tommy the Knife Torrino singing Chicago together, the smooth crooner and the rough gangster harmonizing perfectly as 800 people witnessed a moment of pure magic. But the real shock came during the second verse, when Tommy revealed he had a beautiful tenor voice that blended seamlessly with Frank's baritone. The feared enforcer sang with the passion of someone who truly loved the city he had spent his life protecting in his own violent way. As they reached the bridge of the song, something extraordinary happened. Tommy began improvising lyrics that revealed his own story. Chicago, Chicago, the city that raised me, taught me to fight but forgot to teach mercy. Frank, without missing a beat, responded with his own improvised verse. Chicago, Chicago, where second chances flow like the wind off the lake, where tough guys discover their hearts ain't fake. The audience watched in amazement as the duet transformed into a musical conversation, two men from different worlds finding common ground through the universal language of song. Tommy's voice, rough but genuine, told the story of a man who had chosen violence because he thought it was the only way to survive. Frank's response carried the wisdom of someone who had found strength through vulnerability. Chicago, Chicago, that wonderful town, they sang together, and for 3 minutes and 47 seconds there was no entertainer and gangster, no Hollywood and streets, just two men from tough backgrounds celebrating the city that had shaped them both. Wait until you hear what happened after the song ended. When the final note died away, the standing ovation lasted for 12 minutes, the longest in Palmer House history. But as the applause continued, Tommy did something that shocked even Frank. The gangster walked to the edge of the stage and addressed the audience directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I came here tonight to challenge Mr. Sinatra because I thought he was just another outsider trying to claim our city. But I was wrong. This man understands Chicago better than most people who were born here. He understands that it's not about being tough. It's about being real." Tommy turned to Frank. "Mr. Sinatra, I owe you an apology, and I owe this audience an explanation. I've spent my whole life thinking that power came from making people fear you. Tonight you showed me that real power comes from making people believe in you." The audience was witnessing something unprecedented, a public confession and redemption from one of Chicago's most feared criminals. Frank placed his hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Tommy, everybody deserves a chance to show who they really are underneath the reputation. Tonight you showed these people that there's more to you than what they read in the newspapers." But the evening held one more surprise that would change both men's lives forever. As the audience finally settled down, Frank made an announcement that stunned everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that Tommy Torrino just sang his last song as an enforcer. Tomorrow morning he's going to start working for me as head of security for all my Chicago performances. Because any man who can harmonize like that, who can show the courage to admit he was wrong, is exactly the kind of person I want protecting the people who come to hear music." Tommy's eyes filled with tears as he realized Frank was offering him a way out of the violent life that had defined him for 15 years. "Mr. Sinatra, I don't know what to say." "Say yes, Tommy. Say yes to a life where you use your toughness to protect music instead of silencing it." Tommy nodded, unable to speak as the audience erupted in another standing ovation, this time for a transformation they had witnessed from threat to redemption in the span of one song. Stop. The legacy of this night will change how you understand the power of second chances. The confrontation at the Palmer House became legendary in both entertainment and criminal circles, but not for the reasons anyone expected. Instead of becoming a cautionary tale about challenging the wrong person, it became a story about the power of respect, redemption, and the unexpected places where you can find common ground. Tommy the Knife Torrino kept his word. The next morning he resigned from his position in the Chicago organization and began working for Frank as head of security. Over the next decade, Tommy became one of the most respected security professionals in the entertainment industry, known for his ability to diffuse volatile situations with words rather than violence. Frank's revelation about the Capone letter sparked investigations that uncovered a network of protection arrangements that had existed between entertainers and organized crime figures for decades. Rather than creating scandal, the revelations led to a better understanding of how performers had navigated dangerous territories during Prohibition and the early days of Las Vegas. But perhaps most importantly, the story of Frank and Tommy became a template for conflict resolution that was studied by mediators, law enforcement agencies, and business schools. The Palmer House incident, as it came to be known, proved that even the most heated confrontations could be transformed into opportunities for growth and understanding. Years later, when asked about that night, Frank would say, "Tommy taught me that courage isn't about facing down your enemies. It's about having the wisdom to turn your enemies into friends." Any fool can start a fight, but it takes real strength to end one with everybody's dignity intact. Tommy, who eventually opened his own security consulting firm, would tell his clients, "That night at the Palmer House, Frank Sinatra showed me that real power isn't about making people afraid of you, it's about making them glad they met you. That's a lesson worth more than any reputation built on fear." The final chapter of this incredible story continues to inspire today. The Palmer House Hotel created a permanent display commemorating the night, featuring photographs from the performance, the actual microphone Tommy used, and a replica of the Capone letter that started it all. The display includes a plaque that reads, "April 15, 1962, the night Frank Sinatra and Tommy Torrino proved that music can bridge any divide and respect can conquer any conflict." Frank Sinatra performed at the Palmer House every year until 1995, always dedicating at least one song to the friends who remind us that everyone deserves a second chance. Tommy attended every performance now as a friend rather than a challenger, and the sight of the former gangster sitting peacefully in the audience became a symbol of the transformative power of mutual respect. The story of their confrontation and reconciliation became required reading at the FBI Academy, as an example of how understanding your adversary can lead to better outcomes than confrontation. It's still taught today in conflict resolution courses as proof that the most unlikely people can find common ground when they focus on what unites them rather than what divides them. But there's one more detail about that legendary night that wasn't revealed until decades later. In 1995, when the Palmer House was renovating the Grand Ballroom, workers found something extraordinary hidden behind a loose panel near the stage. It was Tommy Torrino's original gun, the weapon he had carried into the hotel that night, planning to use it if Frank had refused to back down. Tommy had secretly removed the gun from his jacket and hidden it during the performance, making a conscious choice to embrace music over violence. The discovery proved that the transformation witnessed by 800 people that night was even more profound than anyone had realized. Tommy hadn't just changed his words, he had literally disarmed himself, choosing harmony over harm. The gun, now displayed alongside the other artifacts from that historic evening, serves as a powerful reminder that even in our most heated moments, we have the choice to put down our weapons, whether they're physical, emotional, or psychological, and reach for something better. And that's how a gangster's challenge to Frank Sinatra became a masterclass in turning enemies into allies, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from winning fights but from making sure nobody has to lose.